This is a 17-minute video and I have to crop it down for people to actually want to watch it.
Ladies and gentlemen, what kind of a struggling artist are you?
She's a girl of so many interests.
Cameras were there by the dozen.
Is a book or an author?
Here they are at Brown's Chinese Theatre in Hollywood.
Hello Muggles. Today I'm going to be doing a book chat about The Husband's Secret by Liane Moriarty. I think that's how you pronounce her name. She's the author of Big Little Lies, which I just finished watching, the HBO series starring Reese Witherspoon, Nicole Kidman, and Shailene Woodley. So I will be doing a Real Chats review on that in a few days, so look out for that. She does a really good job writing stories about women. So I'm going to talk about some non-spoilery stuff first, and then for a majority of the video I'm going to have spoilers, so I'll tell you to leave. I don't have the physical copy with me because my friend Megan let me borrow hers. Thank you very much, Megan. So I will just put a picture right here, I guess, or here. So the premise of this book is that it follows 3 women. This is an adult fiction. It's not based on anyone in their 20s. I don't think they're all 30s, 40s, and I think one of the characters is in her 60s. So it's a step away from young adult fiction. So Cecilia's storyline, she's a super successful, super involved person. She has 3 daughters, and she's married to her husband named John Paul. And while he is on a business trip, she finds a letter in the attic that is addressed to her in the case of his death. So basically, like, only open this if I die. And she's like, ooh, I kind of want to read this, but she's not really sure if she should read it because he's still alive and living, obviously alive and living. Does she read this letter? Does she not read this letter? Oh, I can't tell you that. How do I do this? Tess is another one of the main characters, and she has just found out that her husband has cheated on her with her best friend cousin. Their mothers were twins, so they're like really close. Felicity and her were really close, and Felicity and her husband Will had an affair, an emotional affair. They haven't slept together, but she's been cheated on and she's very upset, so she leaves him for a brief period of time and she takes her son Liam to, I believe it's Sydney, Australia. All of these characters live in Australia, which is kind of cool because sometimes I would sit back and try to read their lines in an Australian accent, and then I just fell out of it. So she is trying to deal with, how do I manage this affair, because she doesn't want to go through a divorce like her parents put her through for the sake of her son. The third main character is a woman named Rachel, who's a bit older. Like I said, I don't have the physical copy. I can't remember if she's in her 50s or 60s, but when we meet her, we find out that her son and her grandson, who she is really close to, and his wife, Lauren, are going to be moving from Australia to New York City, and she's really upset about that because she's really close to her grandson. And we find out that she has had this scandal because her daughter was murdered years and years ago, and she still kind of struggles with that, as you would on a daily basis. So these characters, the chapters kind of weave in and out and they start to intersect, and then you get pulled in and you're trying to figure out how they match up with each other and how they end up intertwining. That is all I really have for a non-spoilery section. I do think you should read this. At first when I was reading it, it was really hard for me to get into because just when I was getting invested in one storyline, because there are 3 main characters, it would switch and it would leave that storyline on kind of a mini cliffhanger. So I do recommend sticking it out. I put it down a few times and I actually read another book in the midst of that. But you should definitely follow through and finish it till the end because they do end up intertwining, and there does end up being less back and forth, and we see some of the perspectives within the same chapter. So you just gotta write it out. So on to the spoilers. We end up finding out that Cecilia's husband, like, this is real spoilers, so you really need to have read it. We end up finding out that Cecilia's husband, John Paul, wrote this letter that explained that he actually killed Rachel's he killed Rachel's daughter years and years ago because he got angry because the daughter was going to dump him. Janie, Rachel's daughter who was murdered, name is Janie. So we find out that John Paul murdered Janie when he was a lot younger, and he's been carrying this guilt about it. And so Cecilia has to go through this moral struggle, and she's like, this changes my perspective of him completely. Do I still love him even though I know he's a murderer of a little girl? Like, we have children, we have young girls. How do I love someone who is a murderer? My main question with reading this book, the title is really relevant because the husband's secret. As a wife, do you turn your husband in for doing that? Or do you make it your dirty little secret because you want him to be there for your family? I don't know what I do. And so you see her struggle with that, and then Tess knows who Cecilia is and who Rachel is because Cecilia's kids goes to the same school as Tess's son, Liam. So they kind of talk to each other, and Tess is, you know, dealing with this whole thing of the affair, and she's a very shy person, so she's trying to overcome some of that to fit into this community in Sydney, Australia. I think that's where it's at. But to fit into this school, and hers is more of like an internal struggle because she's like disgusted that her cousin got together with her husband, which you would. And she basically wants Felicity and Will to have their, I think she says, revolting little affair, and then to come back to her because she wants to work it out for the sake of her son. Rachel is living her life, and she's trying to figure out how she's going to cope without her grandson there. She isn't really very close to her son, which becomes very apparent, which is a real shame. So much of her energy has gone into mourning for Janie that she kind of forgets about, you know, her living child, and she understands that that's a flaw in and of herself. So you kind of are really rooting for her to get closer to him, but at the same time, she uncovers this what she thinks is new evidence. She finds a tape of Janie from the day before she was murdered with a young man called, oh god, I think his name is Connor. It's really hard not having the book. Let me look. Yes. She finds footage of Janie with Connor the day before Janie died, and she and Connor are having an argument. So then Rachel in present day is like, this is evidence. Connor killed my daughter. Rachel works at the same school that Cecilia's children goes to and Liam, Tess's son, goes to. Connor is a teacher at that school. So after Rachel finds this footage, she starts to hate Connor even more. She always suspected that he had something to do with it, but she hates him even more because she feels like she found evidence against him. And so their stories intertwine, and they weave in and out in a really good way after you get past that initial, this is too choppy. It's worth it in the end because it heightens the suspense, absolutely heightens the suspense. We end up finding out that Cecilia is going to hide this secret that John Paul murdered Janie because of her, out of her love for her children, because she doesn't want her children to grow up without a father. Jean Paul feels very badly about what he's done. Obviously, he's his whole life tried to punish himself. He'll give up sports that he likes. He'll volunteer. So he tries to punish. He's very self-loathing because he never came clean about this, and it's a huge burden. And then Tess ends up going out with Connor, who, again, Rachel thinks has something to do with Janie's death. And so we're at the climax of the story. The first thing that starts the last string of events is that Tess decides, after her cousin and husband come and surprise her, that she's going to actually try to work on her marriage for Liam. So she calls Connor and tells him, I know we were gonna meet up, please go ahead and just leave, I'm not gonna come meet you. So he's walking Cecilia's daughter is in love with her PE teacher, who is Connor, so she is trying to chase after him on her bike. And Rachel sees Connor, and Rachel speeds up and tries to hit him and kill him, and she actually ends up hitting Cecilia's daughter. So the crazy irony in this is that John Paul killed Rachel's daughter, Janie. Rachel has just hit John Paul's daughter, and it's all because Rachel was trying to hit Connor, who was Tessa's boyfriend. So it's like this dominoes effect, and it's really interesting to watch it play out. About halfway into the book, I thought something like this was going to happen, but at the same time, it's probably because I was also watching Big Little Lies, the HBO show, at the same time. So I was like trying to anticipate and trying to figure out what it was that was going to be twisty-turvy. Rachel ends up not turning in John Paul. Cecilia and John's daughter ends up losing one of her arms, and Tess and her husband end up back together, and she ends up pregnant. And she never really knows if that was Connor's child or if that was her husband's child. All in all, I think this is a really interesting story. I really enjoy that there are strong female characters and that the plots intertwine quite a lot and it makes sense. It doesn't feel forced. I don't know if you've ever seen like Valentine's Day, the movie. That is a story that does not, it's not very good intertwined, but this story was really good intertwined, and I completely saw that it was really planned out really well. The moral is, it's kind of like the butterfly effect, you know, one thing makes another thing happen, makes another thing happen. I actually was reading Glamour magazine a few days ago, and I found out that Blake Lively is tied to this project, and she is going to be, I can't remember if it is producing it or starring in it or what specifically, but I know she's linked to the project and she went after this book, and I am really happy about that because reading it was a very cinematic experience, and I think it'll be translated onto the big screen very well, the same way that Big Little Lies was. I'm going to give this book an A. After the first 50 pages, I loved it. It's a really quick read. I kept setting it down, so it took me a little bit longer, but I read books in between it, but once you're in it, you can sit down and read it in 2 hours if you really want to. I'm also going to be reading The Last Anniversary by this author because of how much I loved the TV version of Big Little Lies and The Husband's Secret, so I completely recommend checking out her other stories. Thank you so much for watching. I don't have a creative outro for this one, which everyone talked about on my last one, so maybe I'll dub something in.